you.
Good morning.
I just wonder if you would take me back to your reflections of that night and the weeks and the days that followed. I was 11 when that happened, and it was one of the very first time that a news story really affected me, because I had fear for my dad, who had dreadlocks, and my brother, who was of dark skin. But what about your reflections?
Yeah, well, I was part of the Black Police Association, and even though I was based in North London at the time, there was definitely a sense of dread on, you could relate to the Lawrence family, and Stephen could have been my brother, my cousin, etc. So it had that real sort of relevance and hurt and pain, and this case has always been a touchstone for the black community. I'm very privileged, especially since giving evidence at the Macpherson inquiry into the death of Stephen. And I was one of the officers who said that the Met was institutionally racist. We got to know the Lawrence family, and it's great to have that sort of conversation with Neville and Doreen, because they gave their humanity such dignity, and they would challenge, and they wouldn't be gaslighted and said everything's fine. They always stood their corner, stood in their corner very strong, and it gave us a real sense of how to put ourselves across in the Black Police Association, and to not acquiesce, but to say it as it is, and because we're part of the black community and we speak up on behalf of the black community, and in particular the Lawrences and what they were going through. So it had so many overlaps with me personally. I think also, I'm of Jamaican heritage, similar to the Lawrence family, and so I can relate to them in that respect as well.
What did you make of the Lawrences', I'd say, dignified fight for justice? And I said to you while we were watching Shaman's report there, actually, you don't hear from Neville very much, but what were your early indications of their fight for justice?
Well, their grit and determination that they needed to know what had happened to their son. Obviously, they know he was killed by racists in the community, but why weren't they arrested? Because there was a lot of information at the time. Why wasn't this acted upon? And obviously they'd start to find out that there was collusion with the family, there was corruption, incompetence to some extent. And of course they realised that there was a racial element to it, and then they start to look wider and see that this wasn't just a one-off. The way in which Stephen's murder was investigated. And as a result of that, they sensed that there was a wider issue of institutional racism that needed to be addressed. And I think that's why Nelson Mandela, when he came over, he totally identified with the case. And as a result of that, he spoke up on their behalf, which really resonated with the Labour Party, and because this was the sort of mid-90s, and obviously the election in '97, they were voted in, and the Labour Party totally accepted that there was issues to deal with policing in a way that had to be addressed, and it couldn't be left ongoing and kicked into the long grass. It had to be dealt with, and I was really pleased when the Home Secretary Jack Straw announced the Macpherson inquiry, and it was a statutory inquiry, so it wasn't just another report or review, but it had teeth, and it could hold the police to account. Because I truly believe there's nothing wrong with them. It can't be addressed by what's good in it, but it just needs the right leadership. It needs the right political will to hold them to account, to make it the police service more accountable and transparent. And it's very similar to police forces across the country. And it just really needed that sort of political will and independent oversight of not only the report, but the recommendations and how they were going to be rolled out. Because what gets measured gets done. And that was the important thing about those recommendations, because they made, they were a watershed in terms of policing and changing policing for the better.
So you fed into that 1999 Macpherson report. Talk to me about the cultural changes that happened within the Met Police in that 10-year period.
Well, immediately, the casual racism, the N-word, the P-word, the W-word, stopped.
Right.
So they realised, you know, that the bad cops knew they had to shape up. And it created a positive atmosphere, so the good cops would call out the bad cops. Diversity, inclusion was, you know, the golden thread going through so many different forms of policing issues. It had operational effectiveness. And I was able to show how complaints within the organisation were reducing, complaints by the community was reducing. Policing was a light touch. It wasn't a heavy handing. People felt the police were for them instead of feeling over-policed and under-protected. And it's because the independent oversight was there, holding the police to account through the Stephen Lawrence Steering Group, chaired by Jack Straw. It had Neville and Doreen Lawrence in that group. And I was one of the people, as chair of the National Black Police Association, to be privileged to be on that group. But I was also in the room when Paul Condon said, listen, these are recommendations. We've been called institutional racism. We will use it as an aspiration to be better, not to go into semantics or gaslight, but to say, listen, we can be the police service that the public demand.
So it's really interesting to get your thoughts then, finally, Mr. Logan, on where you see the Metropolitan Police at the moment. We've had a recent report that said it's institutionally homophobic, xenophobic, racist. Is the right man in charge to push the Met into the place where it needs to be?
Well, I know Mark Rowley. He was in the Met when leading up to Cressida Dick taking up a commissionership. Sadly, it reminds me, the look and feel of policing reminds me of a pre-Macpherson era. It seems to be more of an occupying force. As you say, the Casey report showed not only that the certain units like the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Group was a safe haven for predators, you know, Carrick and Cousins. All of these people which you think never would happen if there wasn't the checks and balances, if supervisors were doing their job. They weren't being protected. There wasn't that culture of fear that prevented the good cops calling out the bad cops. And those systemic failures were being dealt with in a way that you started to see real significant change. And, of course, the political will was not there to hold the Commissioner and the Chief Constables to account. And that's why the Commissioner can say, oh, well, I don't believe in institutional racism. So that until you acknowledge you have a problem, you're not going to do something about it. So I don't think Mark Rowley is really equipped to deal with it, because he was there when it was going bad. You know, when they come through that culture, they're very protective. You know, they don't keep that critical distance, and they're not able to really do the sustainable change that's going to hold that police service, the Met, and the rest of the police services around the country to the level of integrity and ethics and professional behaviour. And, of course, getting the basics right. That's why the Met's in special measures, because they're not even just getting the basics right around how to police London.
OK, Mr. Leroy Logan, pleasure to have you in the studio today. Thank you for your thoughts.